Welcome back to another episode of I Wish They Knew, a show where we share big ideas that deserve more attention and about the time it takes to enjoy a cup of coffee. I'm Joe Hirsch. Today's wish comes from Craig Forman. Craig is an organizational psychologist and the founder of Culture C Consulting, where he helps organizations transform workplace culture. Boy, do we need that more than ever. He's been at that for a while, over 15 years of experience, including 6 years as lead people scientist at Culture Amp. And Craig is also a graduate teaching fellow at Harvard, focusing on motivation and leadership. Hey, Craig, welcome to the show.
Hey, Joe. It's good to be here. I appreciate you having me.
Looking forward to this. So what do you wish more people knew?
I wish leaders break out of this idea that culture is something that's intangible. It's like a vibe or values written on a wall. And the truth is, culture is quantifiable. We can measure it, understand it, and use that data to take meaningful action. And that was part of my own journey as well, of somebody that's really fascinated with this and figuring out how to connect the dots between leveraging data, but also really focusing on this fuzzy thing people think of as culture. It is manageable, and we can think about it and leverage data in really powerful ways to help leaders, managers, teams, organizations do better and be more intentional about building culture.
I think it's Texas A&M who has this great motto: from the outside looking in, you can't understand it. From the inside looking out, you can't explain it. And I think that's true for a lot of cultures. You kind of know it and you feel it. You can't always articulate it. Leaders spend a lot of time trying to shape the culture, and they do that through lots of different ways. But there's a whole culture conversation that they're missing if they don't actively listen to their people, right?
Absolutely. So I often start by just saying, how do I define culture? And that's broad culture at an organization, the way we do things around here to achieve some sort of objective or outcome, some promise to the world, our brand. And the reality is, if that doesn't work, then the organization ceases to exist and people go to other cultures. So I help organizations just say, what are your goals and objectives? Like, what are you trying to create? Right? I was in the military. Maybe you're the 82nd Airborne Division and trying to get 70,000 people anywhere in the world in 24 hours. That's a unique objective. So what do you need to do? What are the core behaviors that are going to help achieve that? And then how do we get our people and our organization aligned to be most successful in that? So how do we do things around here to achieve that goal? That's, to me, organizational culture, and how I try to help organizations think about it.
What could more organizations be doing differently to create the kind of culture first workplace that people want to stay in and thrive in?
Well, I think the first thing is what you just brought up, is being clear about your culture, whatever it is or whatever it isn't. If you're a trading company in Wall Street and you're about competition and money, then if that really is what you're about and that's your culture, then own that, say that, attract the right people. Because even when you said that, Joe, I think to myself, I've been in toxic environments where maybe I was mismatched. Maybe it was the wrong place for me. So I think when companies are really clear about who we are, what our values are, if they've done that legwork to say, this is what we believe is the right sort of framework that's going to advance what we're doing in the world. I use the military as an example, right? If they lay it out front and say, here's what we believe, here's what our mission, our objectives are, here's what our values are, we can ensure that we're getting the right people, and the people that don't fit into that also can go to the right place for them. So I think one is that companies are very honest and don't sell one thing and then deliver another to an employee. I find that organizations that have that really well aligned and that are values driven in an honest way, not in a way that they say one thing and do another, that you tend to have the strongest organizations.
Aside from being really clear about your vision, your values, what can organizations do to screen out the wrong candidates to make sure they have the right people in place that are in alignment with their values?
I love that you brought up the culture fit. Culture to me is, how do we do things around here? So if we've done a really good job of understanding how we as an organization are going to go about our purpose, our mission in the world, and we know what those values are, and we lead with that, I think it's okay for an organization to say, you can't be everything for everybody. We have to be careful, because what we don't want is just everybody hire their buddy. We want to be careful that we are not marginalizing people, that we're not discriminating against people in this idea of culture fit. But what we're doing is saying we're really clear on our outline of how we're going about what we're doing. And if this works for you, we want you. And if it doesn't, it's okay. I think a good, healthy culture attracts the right people and pushes away the people that don't belong there. I think when we try to be everything for everybody, then what we get are these cultures where we don't know exactly who we are, what we're about, because we're trying to be everything for everybody.
So at an organizational level, starting really from the top, what are some things that organizations can do maybe beyond the survey to become more effective listeners, to be more intentional, as you're saying, about noticing the culture and making sure that they're both broad enough to have everyone, be part of it, but specific enough that they're clearly defining their goals and mission.
We need a mechanism to gather information, but then we need to contextualize that information, make sure we understand it, and then take action and communicate that out. That is listening. Data can tell us a lot about a group, but very little about an individual, right? And individuals can tell us a lot about themselves, but we know statistically don't do a good job of telling us about a group. So how do we balance those two? So when you talk to me about leaders, I have to think about both of those, because oftentimes when you get an organization that has 500, 1,000, 20,000 people, if we don't have some sort of large kind of a way to capture sentiment, poll your people, engagement surveys, whatever that might be, periodically, we need a way to contextualize and say, what we're hearing, what we're seeing, what we're thinking, are we validating that? Because when I work with organizations, particularly when we run large like engagement surveys for the first time, almost always what we see is it validates things that they already believe, and there's always stuff they go, oh really, that's what they think, that's what's most important. So I don't want to strip the two away. I see it together, that as an organization, the leadership team needs to be responsible in taking snapshots periodically to say what's the current state in our benchmark and where are we going to focus. Then they go and they have those one-on-one conversations, they discuss with their teams, they're more methodical, starting with what are we trying to understand. In the case of engagement's the outcome, right? How do people, are they proud to be here? Do they see themselves here? And are they motivated to go above and beyond? Like, we know that those are kind of core elements of engagement. So when you ask those questions, then you ask a series of other questions. How do I feel about my leaders? How do I feel about my managers? How do I feel about my systems and processes, or compensation, or is my voice is heard, psychological safety, those sorts of things. And then do a relationship back to engagement, the thing we're driving for, the outcome. Now we've gone to another level with an organization to be able to say, look, I see that your lowest score here might be around compensation. People think it's not that great, but the reality is it's not a very strong relationship to engagement. However, leadership communication, and that leaders are communicating a vision that inspires me, has a high relationship. Now I'm able to communicate something very different to a leadership team where historically they just jump at the lowest score. Now we're doing is contextualizing it and saying, if you want to drive engagement, let's do an analysis and see what are the things that your people are saying have the biggest relationship to engagement, and let's focus there. Now we can pinpoint, right? So we started with this big, broad picture of what could be done. And these are the areas that are telling us they're going to have the biggest impact. Let's get focused. Now we get into is it trainings? Is it communication? Is it tools that we need? And then we're going to do that again in 6 months or in 1 year and see, did we move the needle? Because we know that if we move the needle there, we're driving engagement, which is performance, or turnover, right? The two big drivers for an organization. So what I see is a bigger world where periodically we do something to give us a lay of the land that helps dictate where we're going to focus. Then we go in and get beyond the survey, and we get in and we work with our teams around training, support, tools, whatever it might be, to have a hypothesis and test that hypothesis, because we're moving with an objective and we know what we're trying to drive, and then we can go back and measure it.
Yeah, data tells the story. So when you think about the story of a culture, one of the big questions that comes up for leaders isn't how to manage that culture, but really how to measure it, as you're saying. And there have to be some meaningful measures of the culture, right? How do you think we ought to be going about it so that we can capture meaningful measures at any given moment?
There's this high level outline that I think a lot about, and it's collect, understand, and take action. And each one of those has their own focus. The collect pieces, are you writing good questions? So many times people come to me with a question set and it says, my manager is honest and thoughtful in their approach to the team. And I go back, and that seems like a great question, but I'd say, well, is it honest or is it thoughtful, or something in that vein? And we call that double barrel. There's an art to writing great questions, because a lot of questions will come back, and if it's fuzzy, then I don't know exactly, and you don't know exactly what was answered. So having great questions send signals. What questions are you asking your people? Because that's sending a signal. Then there's that process of, do you have the right tools to make sense? There's a lot of data that comes back. So how do we make sense of this? Like I said before, of looking at, well, what's the relationship to the thing we're really looking to drive? Is that the right area? So taking a moment before you take action and understanding, and then going asking those second level questions, and then moving into effectively taking action and communicating out that you've done something, right? That people see that you're listening. I mean, oftentimes I think organizations, the leaders want the data, but they miss the conversation. I'll just share a story with you that I think really contextualizes this. I was working with an organization. They had a CEO that had taken over. So he was a seasoned CEO, but new to this organization. The organization was going through some challenges and some changes, and he was brought in to kind of change the culture. And we did some work over the course of a year with leadership offsites as well as bringing in data. And when we first closed the survey and we were looking at it together, I pulled up a slide that showed engagement across the different offices. And one of their offices was about 15 or 20 points lower than every other office. Here's the CEO coming into a situation with lots of things going on, trying to decide what to do, where to focus. And he looked at it and he said, I knew it. I know that's an issue. He knew that there was a problem in that office. But when we contextualized it and he saw it against the other offices, he goes, I'm going down there. Within 2 weeks, he made a trip down there. He went again another time within 6 months before we ran the survey again. And from the outside looking in, it looked like that was one of the biggest things that happened was he just went and started spending time at that office because he quantified how different the culture and how people felt at that office, where before he was just dealing with all these different things. And we saw a 15-point lift in engagement in that office the next time we ran the survey. And I love that example because it's not heady and data. It just took something that was big and fuzzy in a world where there's so many unknowns for a CEO coming in and gave him some contextualization, something to hang something on. And when he saw it that way, he immediately took action. And where I'm going with that is I didn't need to tell him what to do. And oftentimes in organizations, I don't. They know their organization better than I do. What I needed to do is just help frame and bring into focus what was happening, how people felt, and get away from sentiment or what somebody was saying, but balancing that against something that was quantifiable together. He knew what to do. And I think that's the thing. Oftentimes we know what to do when we understand where to focus. So I've learned that sometimes it's simply making sure, just presenting the right information, helping people understand what's going on in a way they can make sense of, particularly in something that's fuzzy like culture. They typically know what to do in their own organizations once they understand where to look and how to think about it.
So clarity, context, and then communication, really talking about the results.
Yes. That's the piece when we think about organizational listing or how do we contextualize it, it's often from the perspective of a leader trying to get information. Don't miss this bigger piece that it's about building a relationship with your people. So oftentimes what I see is organizations will do these sorts of initiatives and take on 10 or 15 different things and never be able to communicate back to the organization what they're focusing on, what they're doing. So I'm watching the organization do all this great work and things aren't changing because the sentiment, people don't feel it. I'd rather a company pick one or two things and go out to the organization and say, here's what we heard. We listened to you. This is why we're coming to this conclusion. This is where we're going to focus for the next 6 months. This is what you can expect. Live up to it, do it, and then repeat. And I think I'm trying to get organizations to think that it's not one and done, that building a great culture is iterative. It's a cycle. It's always about listening to your people, both in those conversations and at scale, showing that I heard you. This is what I heard. Are we aligned? Here's what you can expect. Here's what I'm going to do about that. And then I'm going to check in with you. So we can be more intentional as organizations to leverage these, not just for the organization, but for your people, and help them understand that this benefits them and that they're being seen and heard, and show them that you can be trustworthy with that information. Something will happen.
Yeah. Culture tells a story, and it's a story that the company writes every single day. And Craig Forman is one of those guys who can help you write a better ending to that culture story. Craig, thanks for sharing your wish with us today.
Joe, thank you so much. And I'm always open to conversation to help more people think about how to approach it and build really great intentional workplace cultures that deliver with happy people and effective outcomes.